My husband's life insurance paid out 11 months ago. I watched the check clear. I framed the death certificate and put it in the fireplace mantle next to our wedding photo because I didn't know what else to do with it. Last Tuesday, I saw him buying coffee at the Kroger on Millbrook Avenue. His name was Gerald. Gerald Beaumont? We were married for 31 years, and I thought I knew every version of that man. The version who hummed while he shaved. The version who got mean when the Steelers lost. The version who held my hand in the hospital when I had the biopsy scare back in 2019. I thought I knew all of it. I thought I had loved a whole person and buried a whole person and grieved a whole person. I was wrong about every single part of that. I'm Evelyn. I'm 63 years old. I spent 22 years as a licensed practical nurse at Allegheny General before my knees made that decision for me, and I am not a dramatic woman. I don't cry at commercials. I didn't even cry at my mother's funeral, which my sister Roberta has held against me for 14 years. I mention this because what I'm about to tell you is so far outside anything I would have ever believed could happen to a person like me, in a life like mine, in a neighborhood like ours, a plain brick house on a quiet street in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that I need you to understand I am not someone who imagines things. Gerald died on the Thursday, February the 9th. He had a massive heart attack at the gym. At least, that's what I was told. He was 64 years old, a little overweight, had been on blood pressure medication for years. The paramedics said he was gone before they arrived. The funeral home handled everything. My son, my daughter-in-law, my neighbors, my church. They all rallied around me the way people do, and I let myself be surrounded because I didn't know what else to do. I scattered his ashes at Lake Erie because he loved to fish there. I thought that was a good death, a whole death. I need to back up because there are things that didn't mean anything to me at the time that mean everything now. About 4 years into our marriage, Gerald started his own landscaping company, Beaumont Grounds. It did well, not spectacularly, but well enough that we were comfortable. We paid off the house in 2015. Gerald handled the business finances himself, always had. I handled the household. We had a joint checking account for regular bills and groceries, and he had a business account I never touched. That seemed normal to us. That was just how we divided things. Looking back, I realize I didn't know as much about our financial picture as I should have. Gerald did our taxes every year. I signed where he told me to sign. I trusted him the way you trust someone after 30 years, completely, without thinking about it, the way you trust that the floor will hold your weight when you step out of bed in the morning. When he died, I inherited the business, such as it was. His business partner, a quiet man named Roy, told me the company had been operating at a loss for the past 2 years. I didn't question it. Gerald had seemed stressed. I thought that explained the stress. I sold the business to Roy for $40,000 and considered myself fortunate to get anything at all. The life insurance was $200,000. I put most of it in a CD at PNC Bank and tried to figure out what the rest of my life was supposed to look like. That was 11 months ago. Last Tuesday, I drove to Kroger for nothing in particular. I needed coffee creamer and maybe some soup. It was raining and cold, the kind of gray Pittsburgh February that makes you feel like the season has been going on forever. I parked in the back lot because the front was full. I walked in through the pharmacy entrance, past the blood pressure machine, and turned the corner toward the coffee aisle. He was standing with his back to me, reaching for a bag of dark roast on the top shelf. I know my husband's back. I know the particular way his shoulders sit, slightly uneven, because of an old rotator cuff injury on the right side. I know the way he stands with his weight on his left foot. I know the back of his neck. I stood there in the coffee aisle of a Kroger grocery store 11 months after scattering his ashes in Lake Erie, and I knew, with every cell in my body, that the man standing 10 feet in front of me was Gerald. The coffee creamer was in my hand. I set it down on the shelf next to me because my fingers weren't working properly. He turned sideways to read the label on the bag, and I saw his profile. The jaw. The way his nose is slightly crooked from when he broke it playing softball in 1997. It was Gerald. It was absolutely Gerald. He put the coffee in his cart and walked away, and I stood there while a woman in a green coat reached past me for the creamer I had just put down, and I didn't move. I couldn't move. Someone said, "Excuse me, honey," and I stepped aside mechanically, my eyes fixed on the back of Gerald's gray jacket as he turned the corner toward the cereal aisle. Then something shifted in me. I don't know how to explain it except that the numbness cracked and something harder came up underneath it. I followed him. I have thought about that decision many times in the weeks since, whether I should have called someone first, whether I was in shock, whether a rational person would have done something different. But I think the truth is, some part of me knew that if I looked away for even one moment, I would convince myself I had imagined it, and then I would go home and never know. I could not live with not knowing. I kept a full aisle's distance between us. Gerald, the man, whoever he was now, moved through the store without rushing, the way someone does when they shop in a place they know well. He picked up orange juice. He stood in front of the yogurt for a long time, which Gerald always did because he could never decide between flavors. He put two containers in the cart, peach and strawberry, which were his favorites. My chest felt like something was sitting on it. He went to the self-checkout. He paid with a card. I couldn't see which card, and he walked out the front doors. I left my cart right there in the cereal aisle and went after him. The rain had lightened to a drizzle. I pushed through the front doors just in time to see him loading bags into the back of a white Ford F-150. Beaumont Grounds used to have two white F-150s. I knew that truck like I knew our own car. I got the plate number. My hands were shaking so badly I had to type it into my phone twice to get it right. He got in the truck and drove north on Millbrook. I went back inside, sat down on the bench near the pharmacy, and I stayed there for probably 20 minutes. A pharmacy technician came over and asked if I was all right. I told her I was. I don't know if I was. I drove home. I sat in my driveway in the rain. I went inside and I called my son. My son is 40 years old. His name is Patrick, and he has his father's nose and his father's stubbornness, and he lives 20 minutes from me in Sharpsburg. He is the person I call when something is wrong, always has been. He came over within the hour, and I told him everything. The store, the coffee, the crooked nose, the yogurt, the truck. I told him I had the plate number. Patrick listened to all of it. He sat across from me at the kitchen table where we've sat for his entire life, and he listened with an expression I couldn't quite read. And then he said, "Mom, you've been through a lot. Grief does things to people." I looked at my son. I said, "Patrick, I know what I saw." He said, "You saw someone who looked like Dad." It happens. People have doubles, especially from a distance in a grocery store. It wasn't a distance. It was 10 feet, and I saw his face in profile. Patrick was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think you should talk to someone, a therapist. Dr. Okafor could. I got the license plate number. Mom, Patrick." I kept my voice very steady, the way I learned to do in 30 years of nursing. "I need you to look at me and tell me that you believe what you're seeing is grief and not the truth, because those are very different things." He looked away from me. That's when I knew. He looked away and he rubbed his hand over the back of his neck. His father's gesture. A gesture I've watched both of them make my entire adult life. And he looked at the wall instead of at me. "Patrick," I said, "how long have you known?" He didn't answer. How long? He was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, 8 months. The number landed on me like something physical. 8 months meant he had known for 3 months before I scattered those ashes at Lake Erie. He had stood beside me on that shore with the wind coming in off the water, and he had watched me let go of what I thought were the last pieces of my husband, and he had known. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I said, "Get out of my house." "Mom, please let me explain." "Get out of my house, Patrick." He tried. He said his father had contacted him, threatened things. I don't know what, money, the business, some arrangement. He said he hadn't known what to do. He said he was going to tell me eventually. He said a lot of things, and I heard them the way you hear noise in another room, present but not quite real. When he left, I sat at the kitchen table alone for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and I called the private investigator. Her name is Donna. She came recommended by a woman at my church, and she has 20 years of experience in the kind of no nonsense manner that made me feel, for the first time in weeks, like I was talking to someone who wasn't going to manage me. I gave her the license plate number and Gerald's full legal name and the name of his business partner, Roy, and I told her everything I've just told you. She listened without interrupting. At the end, she said, "Give me 72 hours." It took her 60. Gerald Beaumont was not dead. Gerald Beaumont had been living for 11 months under the name Gerald Bowen in a house in Cranberry Township, 40 minutes north of Pittsburgh, with a woman named, and I'm going to say her name once, because she matters, with a woman named Cheryl and their daughter who was 8 years old. Their daughter was 8 years old. I've done the arithmetic many times since then. I won't make you do it. You already know what it means. The house was a nice house, according to Donna. Not showy, but nice. 3 bedrooms, a fenced yard, a garden that had been put to bed for winter. Gerald, according to the property records, had transferred his half ownership of Beaumont grounds to Roy 14 months before his supposed death, 2 months before he died. Roy had paid him $180,000 for that half. The $40,000 Roy had paid me for the same half. The half I inherited, the half of a business I had supported with 30 years of my own work and income, was a fraction of what it was worth. Donna gave me everything in a folder. Financial records, property records, photographs. I sat with that folder at my kitchen table and I read every page twice. There are things I felt that I don't have the right words for. Not rage exactly, though rage was part of it. Something colder and bigger than rage. The feeling of realizing that a person you trusted with your entire life made a careful, deliberate plan to erase you, not in a moment of weakness or passion, but over months, maybe years. Gerald had moved money. He had restructured a business. He had found a woman and made a child and bought a house and built an entirely separate existence. And then he had staged his own death and he had left me with a life insurance payout that was funded, in part, by money he had already taken from our shared future. He had used what was partly mine to disappear from me. I called an attorney on a Thursday morning. Her name is Miriam, and she specializes in financial fraud and family law. And when I sat in her office and laid out the folder Donna had given me, she went very still in the way that experienced people go still when something is both outrageous and legally actionable. She said, "Evelyn, I need you to understand something. What your husband did, faking his death to collect on a life insurance policy and abandon a legal spouse, is a federal crime. Insurance fraud alone carries significant prison time." I said, "I know." She said, "Are you prepared for this to become a very complicated legal process?" I said, "He has been planning this for years. I can be patient." We filed the complaint with the FBI field office in Pittsburgh the following week. Insurance fraud, wire fraud, bigamy, because Gerald Beaumont had never divorced me, which meant his relationship with Cheryl, whatever its legal framing, was not a legal marriage. The agents moved faster than I expected. Gerald was taken into custody on a Tuesday morning, 7 weeks after I saw him in the coffee aisle at Kroger. I was not there for the arrest. I didn't need to be. I was at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee when Miriam called to tell me it was done. I said thank you, and I sat there for a while after I hung up, looking out the window at the yard. Roy cooperated with investigators once it became clear that cooperation was his only reasonable option. The restructuring of Beaumont grounds was laid out in detail. The money Gerald had moved out of our shared accounts in the 2 years before his disappearance. Money I had never noticed because I had trusted him with our finances and never thought to look. Totaled more than $90,000. Miriam is pursuing that in civil court. She is confident. I have learned in the past several months to take that word seriously from her. Patrick called me 3 times before I answered. When I did, I let him talk. He said he was sorry many times and in many different ways, and I listened to all of it. He is my son. He is not a bad man. He is a man who made a terrible choice because he didn't know how to stand up to his father, which is something I understand better than I would like to. I told him that I heard him. I told him that I needed time. I told him that what he had done, watching me stand at that shore and letting me believe a lie he already knew the truth of, was not something I could simply step over, and that I would tell him when I was ready to talk again. He said, "Okay, Mom." I said, "I love you." I meant it. I also meant everything else I said. There are things that change when a truth this large comes apart. Small things. Things you wouldn't think to mention to anyone. I sleep better now than I did in the year after Gerald's death. I thought that was grief. The sleeplessness. I realize now it was something my body knew that my mind hadn't caught up to yet. A wrongness in the air that I couldn't name. Now that the wrongness has a name, I sleep. I started swimming again. I had a membership at the YWCA that I had let lapse years ago because Gerald thought it was a waste of money, and I rejoined in March, and I go 3 mornings a week, and the water is cold and clear, and it asks nothing of me. I have a neighbor, Harriet, who has been bringing me soup since February of last year, before any of this, just because that is the kind of woman she is. I told her everything over her soup one evening in April, and she listened, and, when I was done, she refilled my bowl without saying anything, and then she said, "You know, you are one of the toughest women I have ever sat at a table with." I told her I didn't feel tough. She said, "Nobody does." I thought about Gerald for a long time in those weeks. Not the Gerald who disappeared, but the Gerald before. The man who hummed while he shaved, who got mean when the Steelers lost, who held my hand in the hospital. I tried to figure out which version was real, whether any version was. I don't think that's the right question anymore. I think the answer is that he was a person who made choices over many years that told me exactly who he was, and I wasn't looking at the choices. I was looking at the man I had decided to love, and I kept adjusting what I saw to fit what I believed. I am not blaming myself. I want to be clear about that. What Gerald did is Gerald's fault, entirely and without qualification. But I am 63 years old, and I have watched enough patients come through a difficult thing and either grow or harden, and I have decided, very deliberately, that I am going to be the kind of person who comes out of this knowing more than she went in. What I know now, I should have understood our finances, not because it was my job, but because it was my life, and my life deserves my attention. I know that trust given without verification is not wisdom. It is a gap someone else can step into. I know that silence is not always peace. Sometimes silence is just the sound of something wrong that hasn't shown itself yet. I know that I am not what happened to me. The legal process is still ongoing. These things take time, and Miriam continues to be patient and confident, and I have learned to trust her. Gerald has pleaded not guilty, which surprised exactly no one. The federal case is moving through its stages. Miriam estimates we are 12 to 18 months from resolution, and she has already recovered a portion of the business funds in a preliminary judgment that Roy did not contest. I have not seen Gerald since that Tuesday in February in the Kroger. I don't know that I need to. I do my laps at the YWCA on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings. I have coffee with Harriet on Sundays. I am slowly, carefully learning to read a financial statement, which my accountant, a very kind woman named Patricia, one Patricia, who is absolutely real and present and not hiding anything, is helping me with. Patrick and I are talking again. It is careful and slow, and we are both finding our footing, but we are trying, and I think trying counts for something. The pool opens at 6 in the morning. I am always there when the doors unlock, and I swim in the lane closest to the window, where the early light comes in flat and pale and turns the water this particular shade of blue-gray that I have started to think of as mine. I count my laps. I breathe. I turn at the wall and push off and go again. That is how I know I am going to be all right. Not because everything has been resolved, or because the hurt is gone, or because I have figured out what 31 years of my life actually were. I don't know the answer to that, and I may not for a long time. But every morning I drive to the pool in the dark, and every morning I get in the water, and every morning I come out on the other side of a thing I wasn't sure I could do. That is enough. For now, that is enough. I have thought a lot about the word trust since all of this happened. Not in a bitter way, or not only in a bitter way, more in the way you think about a tool you've been using wrong your whole life and only just now noticed. I trusted Gerald the way I trusted the floor under my feet, automatically, without looking. And I think that is the part I have to sit with, not because what he did was my fault. It wasn't, not one piece of it, but because I am the one still here, and I am the one who has to decide what kind of person I'm going to be on the other side of it. What Gerald did had a shape to it. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in small decisions over years, each one building on the last. He moved money a little at a time. He restructured the business quietly. He built another life in increments so small that no single one of them looked like what they all added up to. That is how a person becomes capable of something enormous, not in a single moment of weakness, but in 100 small ones, each of which could have been stopped and wasn't. Every choice he made to deceive me made the next one easier. That is not a religious principle. That is just how human character works. We become what we practice. And Patrick, my son, I have had to think very hard about Patrick because he is easier to forgive and harder to understand at the same time. He is not a cruel person. I know that, but he stood on that shore with me and he let me scatter what I thought were ashes, and he said nothing, and that silence was its own kind of choice. He chose his discomfort over my truth. He will carry that, not as a punishment. I am not interested in punishing my son, but because that is simply how it works. The things we choose to do or not do stay with us. They change us, whether we intend them to or not. Patrick knows something now about what he is capable of, and I suspect he will spend a long time deciding what to do with that knowledge. What I want for him, if I am honest, is that it makes him braver, that the weight of what he didn't say becomes the thing that teaches him to speak sooner, even when it costs him something. As for me, I think the truest thing I can say is that I came out of this knowing more than I went in, and that feels like something worth having, even if the price was steep. I understand money now in a way I didn't. I understand that love and attention are not the same thing, and that paying attention to the practical details of your own life is not cynicism, it is self-respect. I should have known our finances, not because Gerald was untrustworthy, but because it was my life, and my life deserved my attention regardless. I think about the woman I was the morning I drove to that Kroger for coffee creamer, moving through my grief on autopilot, not expecting anything from the world except more of the same quiet loss. And then I think about the woman who got the license plate number, was shaking hands, and called a private investigator 48 hours later. I'm not sure there is as much distance between those two women as it might seem. I think the second one was always there. I just needed a reason to show up. The pool opens at 6 in the morning. I am always there when the doors unlock. That is enough. That is enough.